I always thought that jealousy was something reserved for new relationships. You know, the fleeting kind of insecurity that comes when you're still figuring each other out. After 10 years of marriage, I assumed we had evolved past all of that. But assumptions, as I learned, can be dangerous. It started subtly. A lingering glance from my wife, Hannah, when I'd return home late from work. Her questions felt just a little more pointed than usual. "Who are you with?" she'd ask, casually, but her tone told me she wasn't fishing for small talk. I brushed it off, thinking nothing of it. We had trust. Or so I believed. Hannah and I had what most would consider a comfortable life. 2 kids, a suburban home, careers that kept us busy but provided stability. She worked as a freelance designer from home, while I commuted to the city for my corporate job. Our routines were well established, perhaps too well. But something shifted after our 10th anniversary. The celebratory weekend away had been wonderful, yet when we returned, it felt like the air between us had thickened. I couldn't pinpoint why, but Hannah's behavior grew increasingly unpredictable. At first, I thought she might be stressed. Her design projects had picked up, and managing clients often left her drained. But it was more than that. She was suddenly more affectionate, almost overly so. She'd greet me at the door with lingering kisses, sit close to me on the couch, and ask about my day with an intensity that felt unfamiliar. "You've been so attentive lately," I said one evening, wrapping an arm around her as we watched a movie. "Not that I'm complaining." She smiled, but there was something behind it. A flicker of hesitation. "I just realized we don't spend enough time together. I don't want to take things for granted." It seemed like a reasonable explanation. But her eyes told me there was more she wasn't saying. Then came the messages. It was a Saturday morning when I found her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Hannah was upstairs with the kids, so I glanced at the screen, just curious. A message popped up from a name I didn't recognize. "I miss you already. Last night was incredible." I felt my stomach drop. Before I could process it, Hannah walked in, and her eyes flicked to the phone instantly. She snatched it up, giving me a too quick smile. "Client stuff," she said, tucking the phone into her pocket. I wanted to believe her. After all, it wasn't like I had any proof of wrongdoing. Maybe it was just work-related. But doubt crept into the corners of my mind. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I brought it up, cautiously. "Who was that earlier?" I asked. The message seemed personal. Hannah paused for a long time before answering. "It's nothing to worry about. A friend from my design group. We all went out for drinks after a project wrapped up." I nodded, but something about her answer didn't sit right. Hannah wasn't one to go out often, let alone mention drinks with colleagues. Yet I let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking. But from that day forward, I couldn't shake the gnawing sensation that something was off. The following week, I started paying closer attention. Hannah had always been private with her phone, but now she never let it out of her sight. Late-night messages became more frequent, and she often stepped away to take calls in hushed tones. I wrestled with the idea of confronting her directly but hesitated. Was I being paranoid? Had I become the jealous husband I never thought I'd be? One evening, after Hannah had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the ceiling. I grabbed my phone and opened the search bar, my fingers hovering over the keys. Should I look into it? Before I could make a decision, a notification lit up my screen. A friend request, from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Rachel. Rachel and I had dated briefly in college before I met Hannah. The request felt out of the blue, but curiosity got the better of me. I accepted, thinking nothing of it. The next morning, Hannah noticed immediately. "Rachel added you?" she asked over breakfast, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged. "Yeah. Random, Right. Hannah's reaction surprised me. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Well, I guess you're reconnecting with old flames now. I froze. It's not like that. We haven't even talked yet. Sure, she said, sipping her coffee. Let me know if she's as charming as you remember. Her words lingered long after she left the room. That was when I realized the shift in Hannah wasn't just in my imagination. It wasn't that she was hiding something. She thought I was. Rachel's friend request might have been innocent, but the impact it had on Hannah was anything but. That morning, as I drove to work, her reaction replayed in my mind. I wondered if I had unintentionally opened a door that had been quietly locked for years, the door of suspicion. By the time I parked at the office, I decided to message Rachel. Hey! Long time. What made you think of me? I sent it casually, not expecting much of a response. Minutes later, she replied. Saw your profile in the people you may know section. Thought I'd say hi. How have you been? The conversation didn't last long. A few polite exchanges, memories shared, and that was it. There was nothing flirtatious, nothing inappropriate. But for some reason, I didn't mention it to Hannah. Maybe I should have. When I got home that evening, Hannah greeted me at the door with a warm kiss, but her eyes held that same guarded look I had seen recently. How was work? She asked, wrapping her arms around my waist. Busy as usual, I replied, hugging her back. How about you? Any more late-night client calls? She stiffened for just a second, but it was enough for me to notice. No, she said, her voice smooth but careful. Not today. I didn't press further. Instead, we spent the evening with the kids, played board games, and for a brief moment, I felt like things were normal again. But that feeling didn't last long. Later that night, as Hannah showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it instinctively. Another message. From the same unknown number. Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? I felt my stomach twist. The steam from the shower seeped beneath the bathroom door as I sat there, staring at the screen. My pulse pounded louder with each passing second. I could confront her. I could demand answers. But something held me back. A tiny, nagging voice whispered, "What if you're misinterpreting this?" Instead of reacting impulsively, I did something I never thought I'd do. I grabbed a piece of paper and jotted the number down. The next morning, while Hannah was dropping the kids off at school, I made the call. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered. Hello. I froze. Who is this? I asked, trying to sound calm. There was a pause. Then he chuckled. You're her husband, aren't you? The air left my lungs. Who are you? I think the question is, who do you think I am? His tone was light, almost playful, as if this were a game. I clenched the phone tighter. If you don't tell me. Relax, he interrupted. I'm not who you think I am. Hannah and I worked together on a design project. She didn't tell you? I blinked. Design project? Yeah. She's been consulting with our firm on a few marketing designs. We all went out for drinks last week. Maybe she didn't want to make you jealous. His words made sense, but there was something off about the way he said them. Too casual. Too smooth. Next time, just ask her, he added. You'll save yourself the trouble. The call ended. I sat in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. Was that the truth? Or had he just spun a convenient story? When Hannah came home, I watched her closely. Every laugh, every gesture, I scrutinized them all. She caught me staring at one point and smiled. You okay? You've been quiet today. I forced a smile. Just tired. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more the doubt grew. That night, Rachel messaged me again. Hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to ask, are you happy? I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. What did she mean by that? More importantly, why did I hesitate to answer? Rachel's message lingered on my screen like an unanswered question from the past. Are you happy? I could have ignored it. I should have. But instead, I found myself typing. Yeah, I think so. Why do you ask? Her reply came almost immediately. Just curious. You always seemed like the kind of person who wanted more out of life. I remember how you used to talk about moving away, starting over somewhere new. Do you still feel that way? I stared at the message, caught off guard. I hadn't thought about those conversations in years. Back then, I had wanted more adventure, more excitement, more than just settling down. But life had a way of anchoring me. Hannah happened. The kids happened. And somewhere along the way, the idea of more quietly faded into the background. Things change, I replied simply. Rachel didn't push further, but I felt something stir, a quiet itch I couldn't scratch. I locked my phone and set it aside, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But I could feel the shift. The following weekend, Hannah suggested we have a date night, just the two of us. It was rare for her to initiate, and I welcomed the idea. Maybe we needed it. Maybe I was making a bigger deal of things than necessary. We booked a table at a cozy restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to frequent before life became packed with school runs and bedtime routines. Hannah looked beautiful that night, radiant in a way I hadn't noticed in months. Her laughter felt genuine, and for the first time in a while, I let myself relax. See, she said, sipping her wine. This is nice. We should do this more often. I agree. I reached across the table, brushing my hand against hers. Maybe we've both been too distracted. Her eyes flickered for a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. Distracted by what? She asked lightly, though I sensed the weight behind her words. I hesitated. I don't know. Work, the kids, life. Hannah smiled, but there was something guarded about it. Or maybe someone from the past? I stiffened. Rachel's just an old friend. Did I say Rachel? Her voice was soft, but the implication hit hard. I leaned back, my appetite suddenly fading. You're right. Maybe we should talk about this. Hannah set her glass down, her gaze steady but unreadable. I just find it interesting. I mean, I'm not accusing you of anything. But it's funny how easily someone from years ago can pop back in, isn't it? I wanted to defend myself, to explain that nothing was happening, but the words caught in my throat. Because deep down, I knew that Rachel's message had unsettled me for reasons I couldn't fully explain. I could say the same thing, I said carefully. That message I saw, the one from your client. Hannah's expression didn't change. Is that what this is about? She asked, leaning forward. That's why you've been distant. I just want to know the truth, Hannah. For a moment, she held my gaze. Then she exhaled and looked away, running her fingers along the rim of her glass. I haven't been lying to you, she said quietly. But I didn't tell you everything either. My heart thudded. What does that mean? Hannah's eyes flicked back to mine, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable beneath the surface. It's not what you think, she said. The messages weren't from another man. Confusion twisted in my gut. Then who? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There's something I didn't tell you. A few months ago, I reconnected with someone I hadn't seen in years. I frowned. Who? Hannah lowered her gaze. Her name is Emily. The name didn't ring a bell immediately. But then it clicked. Emily, Hannah's ex-girlfriend from before we met. She'd mentioned her once or twice, but I had never thought much of it. I sat back, stunned. Emily? You mean? Yes. Hannah's voice was soft. She reached out to me online. At first, it was just friendly, but I didn't expect it to stir up so much. A strange mix of relief and confusion flooded me. This wasn't what I had expected. Not even close. So, you've been seeing her? I asked, carefully. No, Hannah said firmly. We met for coffee once, but that's it. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure how to explain it. I thought maybe I could just let it fade away. I stuttered her, unsure how to feel. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked. Hannah smiled sadly. Would you have believed me if I had? I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure I would have. Hannah's confession left me sitting there, staring at her across the candlelit table, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. Emily. I hadn't thought about her in years. I never considered the possibility that someone from Hannah's past could resurface like this, especially not her. The restaurant buzzed quietly around us, but it felt like we were sitting in a vacuum, detached from the rest of the world. Why did you meet her? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Hannah hesitated, stirring her drink absently with the straw. I don't know. Curiosity, maybe. When she messaged me, it brought back memories I hadn't thought about in a long time. I guess I wanted to see how much we'd both changed. I nodded slowly, but I wasn't sure if I could fully accept that explanation. Curiosity could explain a message, but not secret meetings, late-night texts, and cryptic phone calls. And did you? I pressed. Did you feel anything for her? Hannah's eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw honesty there. I didn't think I would, she admitted. But I did. Not in the way you might think, but enough to confuse me. There it was. The answer I had been dreading. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The flickering candle between us seemed to mirror the uncertainty dancing between our words. I'm not angry, I said after a long pause. But I need to understand, what does this mean for us? Hannah reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. I love you, Mark. That hasn't changed. But I think we've both let things slide. We've gotten too comfortable. And when someone from the past comes along, it makes you question everything you thought was certain. I stuttered, her hand resting on mine. It felt familiar, warm, steady, yet somehow distant. You could have told me, I said softly. I know, she whispered. But I didn't want you to think it meant more than it did. Did it? No, she said firmly. Seeing Emily made me realize how much I've built with you. I'm not looking for an escape. I don't want to lose this. Her words should have reassured me, but the shadow of doubt lingered. The next day, I found myself pacing outside during lunch break, unable to shake the weight of our conversation. I thought about calling Rachel, just to clear my head, but something stopped me. Maybe Hannah was right. Maybe reconnecting with someone from the past was dangerous in ways I hadn't fully understood until now. Instead, I drove home early, hoping to talk things through further. But when I stepped inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I wandered into the kitchen, calling Hannah's name. No answer. I climbed the stairs and peeked into the bedroom. Empty. Then I noticed her phone sitting on the nightstand. Unlocked. I hesitated. Snooping wasn't something I wanted to do, but the pull was too strong. I picked it up, scrolling through the recent messages. There it was. Emily's name, accompanied by a string of unread texts. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. I hope you're okay. I know you said it's over, but I feel like there's more to say. Please, just one more chance to explain. My grip tightened on the phone. Hannah had told Emily to stop. She had shut it down. But the fact that Emily wasn't letting go left an uneasy pit in my stomach. Before I could think too much about it, I heard the front door open. Hannah walked in, grocery bags in hand, her eyes widening when she saw me holding her phone. Mark. Her voice was calm, but there was a flicker of tension behind it. I held the phone up. She's still messaging you. Hannah sighed, setting the bags down. I told her to stop. I didn't respond, did I? No. But she's not stopping. I stepped closer, lowering the phone. Why didn't you block her? Hannah ran a hand through her hair, clearly frustrated. Because part of me felt guilty, Mark. I didn't want to just erase her like she never mattered. I thought ignoring her would be enough. Apparently not. We stood in silence for a long time, the weight of the situation hanging between us. Finally, Hannah spoke, her voice softer. I'll block her. Tonight. I nodded, but the doubt hadn't fully lifted. Days passed, and things slowly returned to normal, or as normal as they could. Hannah blocked Emily's number, and the late-night messages stopped. We tried to reconnect, to bring back the ease and trust that had once been effortless. But a crack had formed. Even if it wasn't visible to the outside world, I felt it. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. Rachel. I hope this isn't weird, but I've been thinking about what you said. I'm glad things are good, but if you ever feel like talking, I'm here. I stared at the screen, torn between two choices. I could delete the message, erase the temptation before it grew into something more. Or I could reply. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Hannah and I are fine, I typed. But I didn't hit send. I wasn't sure if I was lying to Rachel, or to myself. I stared at Rachel's message longer than I should have. The cursor blinked, daring me to respond. I knew what the right thing to do was, delete it and move on. But curiosity has a way of sinking its claws in deep. Before I could make a decision, Hannah's voice broke the silence. Mark? Everything okay? I looked up, startled. She was standing in the doorway, drying her hands with a dish towel, watching me with that same quiet intensity she had carried since the night at the restaurant. Yeah, I said, locking my phone. Just a message from work. She nodded, but I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Maybe we had both grown too good at pretending. That night, as Hannah slept beside me, I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't sure why I felt so restless. Emily was gone from Hannah's life, or so I thought, and Rachel's message was nothing more than a ghost from the past. But something still didn't sit right. Curiosity won again. I slipped out of bed quietly and padded downstairs, phone in hand. Sitting in the dim glow of the living room, I reopened Rachel's message. I told myself I'd reply with something simple, harmless, just to close the door politely. But as I began to type, another notification popped up. Hannah's email. It was strange, I never received her email alerts. I glanced at the screen, puzzled. Subject: I'm sorry, but it's over. I froze. My heart thumped hard against my chest as I opened the message, breath catching in my throat. It wasn't from Emily. It was from Rachel. Hannah. I know you told me to stop, but I can't. I didn't expect to feel this way, and I know it complicates everything. I thought reconnecting with Mark would help me let go, but it's only made things worse. I can't pretend anymore. He deserves to know the truth about us. I'm sorry. My phone slipped from my hand, landing with a dull thud against the carpet. I stared at the screen, struggling to process the words. Rachel and Hannah? The pieces started clicking into place in rapid succession. The late-night messages. Hannah's reaction to Rachel's friend request. The quiet distance between us that neither of us had been able to fully explain. It wasn't Emily. It had never been Emily. I stood up, pacing the room as if movement might somehow organize the chaos in my mind. I thought back to every conversation Hannah and I had over the past few weeks, the tension, the hesitation in her voice when I brought up Rachel. Had it always been there? Had I just been too blind to see it? I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in thought, until I heard soft footsteps at the top of the stairs. Hannah appeared, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. Her eyes immediately dropped to the phone in my hand, and even in the shadows, I saw the color drain from her face. "You read it," she whispered. I couldn't speak. "I wanted to tell you," she continued, stepping down slowly. But I didn't know how. I finally found my voice, though it felt hollow. "How long has this been going on?" Hannah's gaze dropped to the floor. "Since last month." It started as a conversation. She reached out to me first. I didn't think it would lead to anything. I let out a bitter laugh, though it felt more like a sharp exhale. And yet, here we are. Hannah crossed the room, stopping a few feet away. "Mark, I swear. I never meant for this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it. Rachel made me question things I thought I had buried a long time ago. But it wasn't supposed to involve you." I met her gaze, anger flickering behind my words. "It does involve me. She's messaging me, too. Did you know that?" Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "No. I didn't." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "What now?" I asked, voice low. Hannah hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know. But I want to fix this. I don't want to lose you, Mark." I wished I could believe her. But the cracks in our foundation felt deeper than ever. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my phone and walked past her, heading upstairs. Hannah called softly after me. "Mark." I paused at the top of the stairs, looking back just long enough to meet her eyes. "We'll talk tomorrow," I said, my voice distant. I wasn't sure if I meant it. The next morning felt unnervingly normal. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the kids argued about cereal like they did every morning. But beneath the surface, the house felt heavier, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of what I had discovered the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee in silence while Hannah moved around the room with practiced ease, making lunches for the kids. She hadn't mentioned the email. Neither had I. She caught my eye briefly, offering a small smile, but I could tell she was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. Instead, I kissed the kids goodbye, grabbed my coat, and left for work. By midday, I couldn't focus. The numbers on my screen blurred together, and meetings dragged on without meaning. My mind kept circling back to the email, to Rachel's words. "He deserves to know the truth about us." I hadn't replied to Rachel. I didn't know how. Part of me wanted answers, but another part feared what those answers might be. Finally, unable to bear the weight of uncertainty any longer, I texted Rachel. "We need to talk. Can you meet tonight?" Her response came quickly. "I thought you'd never ask." 8 p.m.? I hesitated but agreed. That evening, I told Hannah I was heading out for drinks with an old friend from work. She didn't ask questions, though I could feel her eyes on me as I grabbed my jacket. Rachel had suggested a small bar on the edge of town, quiet, out of the way. As I stepped inside, I spotted her immediately, sitting at a corner table with 2 half-empty glasses in front of her. She smiled when she saw me, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually come," she said as I sat down. Neither was I. I folded my hands on the table, leaning in slightly. Rachel. I need to know the truth. What's really going on between you and Hannah? Rachel's smile faded. She glanced down at her glass, swirling the amber liquid inside as if searching for the right words. It's complicated, she said finally. I don't need complicated. I need the truth. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw something vulnerable beneath her confident exterior. She reached out to me first, Mark, Rachel said quietly. After I added you on social media. I think, she panicked. Panicked? I frowned. Rachel nodded. I think she thought we might reconnect, you and me. And instead of confronting it, she chose to confront me. I sat back, absorbing her words. So, this wasn't romantic. Rachel hesitated just long enough for doubt to creep back in. At first, no. We talked. She asked questions about you, how we used to be. It felt harmless. But I think somewhere along the way, lines blurred. I exhaled sharply, running a hand over my face. Rachel, why did you send that email? Why did you say I deserved to know the truth? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She lowered her gaze. Because Hannah's scared, Rachel said softly. She's afraid of losing you. But I think she's also afraid that she's already lost something, in herself. I stared at Rachel, unsure of what to say. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. A message from Hannah. I know where you are. We need to talk, now. I looked back at Rachel. I think she already knows we're talking, I said, sliding my phone into my pocket. Rachel sighed, brushing her hair behind her ear. I'm sorry, Mark. I never wanted to come between you two. But maybe this was inevitable. I stood up. I guess I'll find out. When I got home, Hannah was waiting in the living room, standing near the fireplace, arms crossed. You met Rachel, she said flatly. I did. I set my keys down and stepped closer. She told me everything. Hannah's shoulders tensed, but she didn't look away. Did she? I nodded. She said you reached out to her first. That you were worried about me and her reconnecting. Hannah's lips pressed together in a tight line. I thought I was losing you, Mark. I thought, if I could get ahead of it, maybe I'd feel in control. You could have just told me how you felt. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears. I didn't know how. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But somewhere along the way, I got caught up in it. I crossed the room, standing directly in front of her. Hannah, I'm not perfect. But if you're scared of losing me, the worst thing you can do is push me away. She met my gaze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was seeing the woman I married, not the distant, guarded version she had become. I want to fix this, she whispered. I placed my hands gently on her arms. So do I. But we can't keep hiding from each other. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she nodded silently, resting her head against my chest. Maybe trust wasn't something that disappeared overnight, but neither was rebuilding it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually try. The days that followed felt fragile, like we were walking across thin ice, careful not to break what little remained beneath us. Hannah and I spoke more, surface conversations that tiptoed around the deeper issues we had yet to face. It was progress, or at least I told myself that. But something lingered, unspoken and heavy. Rachel had faded into the background. No more messages. No more unexpected emails. I told myself that chapter was closed, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't finished. One evening, as the kids slept upstairs, Hannah and I sat together on the couch, watching some forgettable TV show. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, but the distance between us felt wider than the couch itself. "Mark," she said softly, breaking the quiet. "Do you think we'll ever go back to how things were?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I wasn't sure. "I think we can try," I replied carefully. "But maybe we are not supposed to go back. Maybe we have to figure out something different." Hannah shifted slightly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Different how?" I turned to her, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "We stop pretending we are the same people we were 10 years ago." She gave a small, sad smile. "I miss those people sometimes." "So do I admitted. For a moment, it felt like we were closing the gap, that we might find our way back to each other after all. But then, Hannah's phone buzzed. I felt her stiffen against me. She hesitated for just a second too long before picking it up. Her eyes flicked across the screen, and I caught the flash of a name before she quickly turned it face down on the table. "Rachel." My chest tightened. I forced a calm tone. "I thought you blocked her." Hannah's lips parted, but no words came out at first. She shifted in her seat, sitting up straighter. "Thought I did." The explanation felt thin, and we both knew it. I nodded slowly, leaning back. The space between us grew. Neither of us spoke as the room filled with the hum of the forgotten TV show. Eventually, Hannah stood, smoothing her shirt and avoiding my gaze. "I'm going to check on the kids." I watched her disappear upstairs, her footsteps soft against the floor. When she was gone, I reached across the table, flipping the phone over. The screen was still lit. "Rachel, I'm still here if you change your mind." I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it settling into my chest like stone. I could delete it. Pretend I never saw it. Or I could confront Hannah and risk tearing open whatever fragile peace we had managed to build. In the end, I set the phone back down exactly as I found it, letting it remain unanswered. Maybe some questions were meant to stay unanswered. Maybe different didn't always mean better. As I sat there in the dim light of the living room, I realized I wasn't sure which of us was holding on to the past, or if either of us ever truly let it go.